All right, everybody, story time. It's October. Every year for my birthday, for as long as I can remember, my best friend, Jenna, growing up, would always make me a spice cake on my birthday. So that's what we're gonna make today. I really highly recommend using this spice cake mix because otherwise you have to make it from scratch and no one wants to do that. So I use this one at the Duncan Hines. There's lots of different brands, so I've already put in 3 eggs, a cup of water, and some oil. And then you're either gonna use 2 of these round cake pans or you're gonna use just 2 equivalent sized pans because we're gonna end up layering this cake. So first things first, you wanna go ahead and get some parchment paper for your cake pans. I use this Reynolds Kitchen parchment paper, and since I'm doing 2 of them, I'll show you this really fancy trick where you take your paper and you're gonna cut it in half. Just eyeball it. You don't need to measure it. Although my husband's sitting here looking at me and I can tell he would prefer that I measure this. Right, John? We'll just pretend that he's saying yes right now because he is absolutely nodding his head. I'm gonna
measure twice, cut once.
See, he's really here. So you're gonna go ahead and cut it kind of like in half, kind of like a half moon, because you want it to fit in here, just enough to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom. It's gonna look like this. Ta-da! There we are. And you're gonna do that twice. All right, so I put the parchment paper in both of the bottom of the pans, and now what I'm gonna do is use this really nifty Pam baking made with flour, because otherwise you have to spray it and then flour it, and it's this whole thing. But luckily, Pam has already made this easier for us. Thanks, Pam. So go ahead and give it a let's try that again. Go ahead and give it a good spray on the bottom. Don't be afraid of Pam. And you're gonna do that for both. Whew, Pam's got a lot of power. All right. Now it may not look very pretty, but I promise you it'll work out really nicely. Okay, so your batter should be mostly smooth and without the lumps. And then you're gonna go ahead and pour in as evenly as you can into both. So I usually go ahead and, oh my gosh, I wish you could smell this. This essentially smells like fall in a bowl. And now what I should really have with me, now that I've done them completely unevenly, is a spatula. If you do them a little unevenly, don't worry, because all will flush out in the baking. And then if you have to do a smaller one on top, you can do that, and do a larger layer on the bottom. And then give it a little swirl. There's one, there's another one. See if you can tap out some of the bubbles. Make it even, we'll fix this. And then I'm gonna put them in the oven at 350 degrees for 23 to 28 minutes. You're gonna wanna go ahead and poke it with something to see if it's done, and we will show you how to make the icing next. I'm gonna focus on making the frosting, which starts out hot, so we have to give it ample time to cool. And to do that, we are going to take half a cup of butter. Now I know what you're thinking. The answer is no, my kitchen never looks this clean. Just from what I filmed, just for you. So you're gonna go ahead, you wanna melt this butter on high heat, get it melted, and then we're gonna go ahead and add a cup of brown sugar, bring that combination to a boil, and then we're gonna slowly add in this half cup milk. I'm using whole milk. Just use whatever milk you have, but I would recommend using a dairy product. If you can't use dairy, I'm sorry, but you could probably use almond milk. But for sure, if you can, use regular milk for this. The butter's melted. I'm gonna go ahead and add in the brown sugar. Make sure you get it nice and mixed up in there because it's gonna start to boil soon, and we wanna make sure that we don't have any clumps. Because I mean, who wants a clumpy dessert frosting? I mean, sure, I'm sure there's someone. And then just stir it. Have you ever made candy before? Thank you, dear. It should start looking like this, kind of thick and gloopy. If you ever made candy before, this is what it starts to look like now. I have it on about 6 medium, and we're looking for little bubbles, which I don't see quite yet. Okay, so the bubbles are just starting to form. Do you see them? Careful if you have pets or young kids around and this starts to splatter, or even yourself, because it can get really hot and it can start to splatter. All right, so now it's officially boiling. And I'm going to start to put in gradually the milk. Ooh, a little bit of cooking alchemy. Remember now, you want to temper it a little bit. You don't want to pour it all in at once, especially if it's cold. Okay, and we're almost done. Keep stirring the whole time. And that's part of the secret to keep it from getting weird. Okay, starting to boil. That's the second part of this. We want to bring this to a boil, stir it up a little bit, and then as soon as it's there, we're going to pull it off the heat. All right, so it's just been brought to a boil. Lovely. This is beautiful caramel color. Just want to bring it up, up, boil, boil, boil. Stir, 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 stir. You can bring the heat down just a hair. They usually say boil for about a minute if you can, but I think this is pretty good. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead now and I'm gonna pull it right off the heat. We're gonna let that cool. It's been about 24 minutes. We're gonna do a doneness check. I love these little wooden skewers. You can pick them up at the grocery store, and you wanna go ahead and just go right into the cake, pull it out. And if there's nothing left on the skewer, which there's not, it is done. Same over here. Go in the middle. If you're nervous, you can go again. And we look really good. All right, so the cakes are mostly cooled, and I've taken out my cake purse, which is this handy dandy storage thing that I use for my cakes, keeps them moist. And then I cut the wax paper into 4 strips to put down in the bottom so that when we frost, it keeps the cake purse from getting all dirty and looking not so fine. And then once it's done, we take them out and voila, it looks really fancy. I am gonna show you a trick for getting the cake out of the pan, because I'm trying to get this cake onto the cake plate, which can be really hard. So sometimes you wanna use an extra plate, you can use a paper plate, and you just wanna invert it, just like that. Oh, there we are. Here's this really lovely piece of parchment paper that we used. And then you can either put it directly on or you can invert it onto your hand. And there you have your first layer of your cake. Look at how beautiful this is. Now we're gonna go ahead and make the rest of the frosting. This is about 2 cups powdered sugar, and I did sift it. And so you're just gonna go ahead, and this has been completely cooled. You're gonna mix it in. And it should start to get a little bit thicker. So you can either use a hand mixer or you can just stir it in manually like this, like I am. And you'll see it start to get kind of thicker as you go. All right. If it's still really thick, you can add a tad more powdered sugar depending on how thick you would prefer it. Okay, so the frosting is done, and the first thing that you need to do in frosting a cake is put a little bit in the middle. Not a ton, because you don't want the cakes to slide as you frost them, but just enough to get like a nice base so that it will hold the other layer in place, but it's also going to give you this lovely frosted bite in the middle. I'm gonna see how fast I can do this with my son in the other room before he realizes we're working with frosting. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put the second layer on. And then just remember that when you're frosting a cake, you're gonna go up the sides first.
You want a drink?
Some of this has to do with architecture. So make sure you're spreading on the sides first to build up on your architecture of your cake. And think of it as like a nice paste to keep it from moving. So you want to start at the middle, and then frost outward.
Okay.
And this is a little bit liquid, so it's gonna run down the sides, and by the time it dries, we will have a beautiful, delicious spice cake. Behold, the beautiful spice cake.